Hi, friend. Niclas here, and welcome to another episode on the show today. I'm super excited to welcome back the incredible recording and mixing engineer, Andrew Scheps. And if you're not familiar with Andrew Scheps, he has mixed records for bands such as the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Metallica, Adele, Hozier, Black Sabbath, and the list of incredible artists goes on and on. And he also does some killer tutorials where he teaches mixing on Pure Mix with the masters, and all over the web you can find awesome tutorials. And he also has his own podcast these days on Pure Mix, which I will leave a link to in the description as well. But it was a huge pleasure welcoming back Andrew. And we actually did an interview a couple of years ago now, and I'll leave a link to that in the description so you can check it out. But I'm really excited to welcome him back, and real honor that he said yes to come back to the show again. And before we get into the interview with Andrew, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Apple Podcast, or Spotify, wherever you're listening or watching this show. Your support really matters, and we're growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you. And also, if you want to get exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe. And it's free, of course, and super easy to do. But that's it. Let's get into the interview with Andrew Scheps. So please enjoy. So awesome, Andrew. I mean, first of all, thank you for taking your time. I really
Sure.
appreciate that. Um, and for people listening, watching, you were kind enough to do an interview with me a few years ago, also, which has been quite popular, I think. I mean, people seem to search for it and seem to find valuable info in that interview. So yeah, really,
Great.
it's really great talking to you again, man. There was actually something in that interview. I don't want to just dive into mixing straight away, but there was something in that interview you said that I utilized and has worked perfectly for me since then. And that was your tip about, essentially, I'm just going to probably misquote you here, but you said something along the way of, does it really matter which headphones you use as long as you know how they sound, or speakers also?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and since you said that, does I utilize that info, and that's been killer, man. So yeah, thank you.
Good. Well, I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, talking about mixing in headphones and whatnot, because there's been so many room modulations coming out, or whatever it is, like what's it called, Ocean Way, there's Slate, there's all that. Uh, is that something you started using in the end, or you never
No.
bothered with those?
No,
No.
I don't use them. I mean, I have speakers. So if I want it to sound like speakers, then I'll turn my speakers on. Yeah, it's a really interesting and very timely topic because also all of the binaural listening for Atmos music and all that kind of stuff, where to make that work, you have to simulate being in a room. There's no other way to get the acoustic cues you need to place things above or behind or whatever. So yeah, it's weird where because people describe, like, if you just put on a pair of headphones and listen to a normal stereo mix, everyone says, well, that's like the sound is coming from inside your head. But it isn't, because humans make an environment. You see the musicians in your head. I mean, some people more vivid than others, but you don't actually feel like it's coming from inside your head. Yet psychoacoustically it is. So if you want to do anything interesting psychoacoustically, you now have to move it outside of the person's head. But that just sounds weird. Like, that messes with stuff. Like, you can't have a super solid kick drum and spatialize it. It immediately is going to be less solid because it has to be. There has to be echo and there has to be reverb, and there's no other way to do it. So it's an odd thing, and it's a big part of everything now, because Atmos Music, with Apple signing on to it as well, is a
Yeah.
huge thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a picture. I don't know where it was. Maybe on your Instagram or whatnot. Like, did you just set up your studio to be like Dolby Atmos? Is that a
Yep,
thing?
yep. I'm 914 in this small room, which is crazy.
Wow.
But yeah, and it's
What's
fantastic.
four? What's four?
Four up top.
Ah,
Yeah, so
that's
I've got
cool.
front stereo and rear stereo. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But so that's something I never really actually understood. So I mean, is that for uh, Apple Music in this case because they're using now?
Well, I mean, Atmos music is just doing music mixes in Atmos. So it's the same Dolby Atmos processing that they've had for film. And the core concept is that it's a virtualized playback environment. So you have a specific number of speakers wherever you're mixing it. And I believe to be Dolby certified, it has to be at least 914. But you could be 22, 6, 12, like whatever. You can be any configuration you want. But when you're mixing, you are placing things in a 3D space. And then during playback, the calculations are made to decide based on your speaker setup what should come out of what speakers and how loud it should be. So you're not tied into like 5.1 and quad were 5 speakers in a sub or 4 speakers, and that's it. And there was no other like way to listen to it. But this is a mix that goes around you and has some stuff above you, and then it plays back on however many speakers you've got. So Amazon and Tidal and Deezer and a few other platforms have been streaming Atmos music for a while, but Apple signing on has obviously, even though Spotify has way more subscribers, but Spotify does not support Atmos yet. Though I can't, it's just got to be a matter of time now because there's so much momentum behind it. So yeah, so it's the ability to have simultaneously this object-based mix that can translate itself onto any number of speakers during playback, including mono. It'll fold itself down to mono. But there is also the binaural component where if you're listening on headphones, all of a sudden now there is an extra spatialization layer that does psychoacoustic stuff to make you feel that room in your headphones.
Right. I mean, my tiny amount of experience doing anything that has to do with multi-channel stuff. Uh, what can I mean? Can you really make the music that much more cool? Like, wouldn't just be a guitar every now and then coming around you?
No,
I
it's different. It's different. I mean, I think it's things like, well, first of all, obviously when you're listening back on speakers, having a center speaker and then also having the phantom center from the left right gives you so much more control over the low end and the vocal and things like that, because you can take like the snare drum and have it in the left right and not in the center speaker, and now those drivers aren't trying to reproduce the snare drum and the vocal, so it's a very different sound. So there's that, but it's just like being able to take the drum kit and spread it further out to the sides and push the cymbals up towards the ceiling. And now you really do get this 3D thing with the drums. And then you add a bit of ambience in the back. And now, without being silly and like, oh, everything has to fly over your head or whatever, but you really do just wrap the mix around you in the room. And even in headphones, if you're careful and you listen to the binaural as you're doing it, you can make that same sense of space happen, but without completely destroying the mix or making it distracting. Like, I think the mistake is to want to just fly things around because you can. But there's usually an element or two that's cool when it's flying around. But the kick, the bass, the vocal, like that stuff wants to be stationary and just sound big.
Right. I mean, that does sound cool, but I mean, so as a mixing engineer like you, have there been a lot of work now, like remixing stuff to conform to this new like trendy thing?
Yeah, I mean, and whether it's trendy or not, who knows? I think the
Yeah,
fact
yeah.
that it has a headphone component makes it much more sticky than 5.1, for instance, where if you
Right,
didn't
right.
have the speakers, you didn't have the speakers and you didn't care. But everybody with like what you're wearing in your ears right now can take advantage of all of the binaural stuff. So yeah, it's going to be pretty sticky, I think. And there are two components to it. One is people are still hiring me to mix in stereo. They're not saying like, hey, we want you to do the Atmos mixes, but then I offer that as part of mixing. Like, hey, look, for whatever the economics of it are, while we're doing the stereo, it's not nearly as much work for me to also do an Atmos as it would be if we started from scratch to do an Atmos. So that's the idea. It is a separate mix. You wouldn't make your stereo from the Atmos necessarily, though you could. It is a separate mix, but it's something that if you think about it properly, and it takes a lot of work to set up a mix template that can go between the two. I spent, I think, 3 solid days just tweaking my mix template so I could begin to do it. And I'm still tweaking it constantly as I do it. But yeah, it just becomes part of the mix process going from stereo to Atmos or the other way around. And back to your original point, working in headphones is a great way to do it because as you start to build the Atmos version, you can start by listening to just the stereo and then start to spatialize it. And you know exactly where things might have gone wrong. Whereas if you're just on speakers, it always sounds good to have stuff coming out of more speakers in the room. Like it always will. But that won't necessarily translate to the binaural.
Right. Right. How come, by the way?
Hmm?
How come that is? Oh, I mean, what do you mean by it won't necessarily translate?
Well, because if you don't do any of the spatialization, then basically your headphone mix would just be a stereo mix down of the multi-channel speaker mix. So you have to do the actual binaural processing, which involves pre-delays and phase and all the stuff that you really need to tweak to get it right. Otherwise, it can just sound phasey. It can make the drums just sound far away. And now like the core driving rhythm of your mix is messed up. So you've got to be careful about how you build the binaural. It's not as simple as saying, man, it sounds great on speakers. What's it sound like binaural? Great, ship it. It's never that simple. So to actually work the other way and start the surround mix in headphones can keep you from getting into too much trouble by finding all these amazing things you're doing on the speakers that aren't translating properly.
Right. Makes sense. But I mean, there's so many cool things coming out of binaural audio, 3D audio, whatever you want to call it. Like I talked to Mirek Styles from Abbey Road. Maybe you know him also. And there's just so many cool things. Like he was telling me, like I think it's Amazon. There's probably many other manufacturers out there where you can nowadays just have one like I don't know what they're called, like a
sound
bar
bar.
speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that can play out Atmos. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, and they
that's
do.
really
I mean, they
badass.
do a pretty good job, and that's why, again, it's why I think this is sticky because you don't have to have 12 speakers set up in your room. You can just have a sound bar, and you obviously stuff isn't going to come from directly behind you because there are no speakers directly behind you. But those sound bars do a really good job of using reflections off walls and things like that. You know, it isn't just left, center, right speakers facing towards you. There are tweeters all over that box. And they're really smart about learning their own environment and then tweaking themselves to play back immersive stuff, you know, whatever that word actually means. So, yeah, it's a thing. And then, like with Sonos, if you got one of their new sound bars, but then you can just chuck 2 more Sonos speakers behind you, and you can get a sub, and you can grow a Sonos system into a pretty great surround thing that's Atmos capable for not a huge amount of money, and it calibrates itself. It's really easy to set up. You don't have to have, you know, really expensive preamp or whatever. So there are lots of ways that consumers can play this stuff back now.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, really cool. And obviously with headphones too, like you said, I hope that's going to be the sticking point. Because I guess what's it called? Apple iPod, no, what's it called?
The
AirPods.
AirPods, yeah.
Pro, yeah, they're supposed to be able to do spatial audio.
Yeah, and Apple has their own spatializing thing on top of the Atmos. So what they do, because it started off with when you watched a movie in Atmos, obviously they knew where you're looking. So if you moved your head, the AirPods Pro and the Max, they know you've moved your head because they've got gyroscopes and head tracking and all sorts of stuff. So they would actually move so you were looking within the sound field because they know where the front is. The front is always where the video is. So there's a version of that, which is obviously it's a lot trickier because your phone could be in your pocket. But there's a version of that for the spatial audio, which as you move your head, you get a little more of the acoustic cues that help you makes, because if you just sit very, very still and you listen to the binaural stuff, sometimes for some people it works really well and it's really easy and they, oh man, that's coming from behind me. Other people don't get it. Like I don't get it. But when you move something, then all of a sudden, oh yeah, that's moving and it's behind me. But rather than having to move all the stuff in the mix, it allows you to move your head within the mix, and that triggers a lot of the brain's ability to locate sound.
Yeah, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's really, really advanced stuff. And what I love about it is it's not advanced electronic stuff. It's advanced neurological stuff. Like it's all about
Mhm.
how humans hear things.
Yeah, but is that something you have delved into yourself, like the actual math, what's going on?
Not the math of it, but yeah, I've done a lot of reading about the way humans hear stuff and the way you separate sounds and the way you predict sounds and the way you recognize things. And yeah, I mean, I'm still incredibly ignorant, but I've done a lot of reading.
Right. What have you learned that you could share with us?
Um,
That's something cool.
well, I mean, what's cool just in terms of brain
Yeah.
function in particular is that your brain is a prediction engine. That's it. Your
Hmm.
brain is always just trying to predict what's going to happen next, because then if it knows what it's going to happen next and it's right, then it's ready for it and it doesn't take very much energy to respond to things. When something happens that's unexpected, all of a sudden your adrenaline has to go up and you have to use lots of energy. And it's from back in the day when you heard a twig snap, you had to know where that had happened and to know if you should start running. Right? It was the keeping yourself alive thing that your brain does, processing all of the input that it gets. And processing sound is much weirder than a lot of the other senses, because the other senses can exist in a static time frame. So like you can take a picture and that's what you see at that moment, and that can be assessed all by itself out of time. Touch is the same way, though with touch it's much easier for you to figure out what it is you're holding if you move it around a little bit, right? So it likes to get change, and that helps it decipher what the hell is actually going on. But sound, the snapshot in time means absolutely nothing. The frequency content of what you hear at a specific moment in time means nothing without what you've already heard and what you're about to hear. So it's a very weird sense in that way. And then also think about how well humans can separate all of the different sounds that are coming in. I mean, the obvious thing is like your fan in your room and your voice in your room. It's easy for you to ignore the sound of the fan, and you would only notice it if it switches off, right? And that's like a normal thing. But what about a baby whose mother is singing it a nursery rhyme or something like that while rocking in a very creaky chair? The child doesn't think that the creaking is part of the song. The child knows what is the creaking and what is their mother's voice, even though frequency range, they're right in exactly the same thing, exactly the same, but they can completely split them apart. So the brain is capable of unmixing, which is insane if you think about it. And it does an insanely good job at unmixing.
Right. That is cool, man. I mean, is that what's called also the cocktail effect? Am I right about that?
Yeah, yeah. When you're at a cocktail party and you're trying
Yeah.
to listen, and it's why it's so hard if you listen to a recording of a cocktail party to actually split the voices out, because you're doing all kinds of things by turning your head and looking at the person. It's
Right.
why conversations are so much more difficult to have when people are masked. Because, I
Right.
mean, look, I can't pretend to lip read, but everybody lip reads to a certain extent, and all of the words that you didn't quite catch, you get either because
Hmm.
of context or because you can see the person's lips and things like that. When you get rid of all of the context, it becomes much, much more difficult to do it.
Yeah, and that's actually something funny that I've seen on my own podcast here, because when sometimes there's been a lag, let's say you start talking and you just freeze, but I still hear your voice, and when then watch it back, I can see my own mouth actually trying to voice what you were saying. It's kind of funny. I think that goes along with what you were saying to some degree.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Uh, but so with music, then how are you able to take your craft to the next level with the Dolby Atmos stuff, knowing what you know, like studying? How does that affect your yeah work?
Well, I think it doesn't really affect my work because my work is always just based on what I'm hearing and trying to make it what I want to hear. So that's still exactly the same. But to me, the more you know about how stuff works, the less you have to think about how stuff works while you're actually working. So when something doesn't sound right to me, I just fix it. And I don't even know how I fix it. Like I don't remember putting in certain plugins when I go back and work on a mix some more. And like things just happen in a creative flow, but that's all from all the work you've put in up to that point of being able to subliminalize all of that so that you're just listening and doing stuff. And the fact that you're doing it with a mouse and turning knobs on a screen or whatever, it's the same as if like, oh, that compressor really well and it's a piece of hardware and you don't look at it and you just turn the knobs. People somehow think like, oh, that's super creative. But if you do the exact same thing on a screen, well, that's just tweaky. It's exactly the same thing. It's just not physically being able to grab it. So you grab it with a mouse. Like it doesn't matter. But it's that ability to just call up the tools without really having to think about them to make stuff sound like the way you want it to sound. And I think for me, the sort of technical side of things is understanding a little bit about how you hear things is I can force the listener, even just in a stereo mix, to feel like stuff is outside the speakers or not necessarily behind them in a stereo mix, but to really play with the sense of depth and sense of width, even just in stereo. And then obviously when you've got the speakers around you, I mean, then it's just easier to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's, yeah, super interesting. But so this actually uh, takes me to another question I had for later, but I guess might as well ask it now. But that's how you have stayed on top of the game for so long. Uh, and I think you answered somehow, but like, how do you stay curious and how do you like navigate the ups and downs? But I think part of what you're doing now actually answers that question. Like you seem to do a lot of research. I mean, you encourage new technologies. You embrace them, I should say. But is there any other things you do? I mean, because like you say, you've done your craft for so long that you don't even think about it, and that's the perfect place to be. But I guess for some people, it might make you maybe lazy. But you don't strike me as lazy at all.
Well, no, because it's like the step-by-step process by which I do the mix, like I don't even care what that is because what I'm always doing is hearing what's coming out and thinking that still sucks. Like I got to make that stop sucking. Like that's the point. So that's never changed. And I'm hopefully slightly better at making it suck less quicker now. Like that's what I'm hoping. And I still feel as though I'm getting better. Like one of the things about doing the Atmos setup was originally I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll just get a bunch more. I already owned 4 pairs of those tannoys that I've used for 30 years. And like, well, maybe I'll do it with that. And I just thought that's insane. That's ridiculous. Using old amplifiers, I'll never get them to sound the same. So I bought PMCs. So even just my stereo monitoring has gotten such an upgrade because these PMCs are insane. They're just so good that I'm a better mixer for it. And so doing that, but it was terrifying to switch speakers after so long because you worry that you won't know what to do when something changes. But as it turns out, with these particular speakers, it was perfect. I never even set the tannoys up. I was going to have them up as well, and I never bothered. There was just no point. So I'm constantly learning things and changing things. And, but the mixing is always the same. I'm just always trying to get it to sound the way I want it to sound. And not even sound the way I want it to sound, but to feel the way I want it to feel. I want it to feel a certain way, either with something as small as just every kick drum, like, it's not hitting me the right way, or the way the chorus feels in the context of the song, or the way the entire song feels in the context of the album. That, all of those things are just how it feels when I listen to it. And I'm lucky enough to have spent enough time to know when it's not feeling right, what tools will probably make it feel more like the thing I want it to feel like.
Yeah, I mean, this also reminds me of another question that I want to ask, and that's it ties in with what you said right now about you're trying to make it the mix feel the way you feel or want it to feel, and being able to express that because having talked to a few artists now on the podcast, it always seems like artists are at their best when they are just themselves. Like they don't think about what to be, what to sound like, whatever, whatever. And you, as a mixing engineer, also have that ability to express yourself on the mix, and that goes with what you're saying. As if you wanted to feel a particular way, obviously that comes from you expressing yourself on a mix or recording, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I'm expressing myself, like the songwriter is expressing themselves with the words themselves or the chords or the small parts they're playing, the leading guitar lines, the percussion pattern, like whatever. Everything to do with the performance and the composition of the music, whereas I'm doing it with frequencies and balance and compression. But a vocal will feel completely different uncompressed, compressed at a low ratio, compressed at a high ratio, distorted, with effects or dry. All of those things affect how you feel when you hear that vocal. And so those are the parameters I'm working with to make you feel differently. But hopefully I'm trying to make you feel exactly the same way that the artist was trying to make you feel. And I'm just finishing the job of making more people feel it than otherwise might have felt that way. And it's something with really young artists where like they've worked on something themselves and it doesn't sound good, but it feels really good. Like their rough mix of their own thing is really cool. And they give it to one of their friends and their friend doesn't mix. And sonically, yeah, it's okay, it's better, but it doesn't feel as good. And this happened with some of my daughter's friends when she was at NYU. Then they're students, and so they haven't done a lot of this. But like their rough mix felt great, sounded bad. They got a mix back from one of the mixing students or production students or something like that. And yes, sonically, they had really sorted out a lot of issues, but the rough mix felt better. And that's the part that's hard to learn as a mixer and the part that takes a long time to learn. I think some people are really great at it immediately. I mean, there are people who are just super talented right away at getting the emotion across sonically. But that's the thing. But when you're a young artist, sometimes you feel like, well, I guess I better use that mix. Like, no. The only important thing is how it feels. If the sonics are getting in the way of more people being able to understand what you're trying to get across, then yes, you do still need to go get it mixed, but it has to be mixed by somebody who's making it feel better than what you already had.
Yeah, exactly. But how did you? Well, maybe a better question is like, what was the turning point? Like, sort of. I guess there was not just a minute and you realized this was the case, but like, how did you start to notice that actually what you want to express is not correct per se, but that that might be working better for the song than trying to be like someone else. Was there like a moment like that?
I don't know if there was a moment, but I know that like there was one song I did with somebody, just like a singer-songwriter guy in LA, and someone hooked us up, and I went and recorded 2 songs. Like it was all very quick and whatever, and I did it, and I'd play it for people, and all they'd ever say is, "Man, that snare sound is amazing." Like I'd gotten a really good snare sound. I'm not very good at recording snares, but like for some reason, the snare was fucking ridiculous on this song. But like that's the worst thing someone could say when you finish playing them a song is the snare sounds great. Like really, that's the thing you took away from that. So I think, and that was pretty early on. So that sort of reinforced the idea that like the sonics alone aren't it, but the sonics inform what people are going to feel later on. But if you ever think it's about anything other than what the listener is going to feel when they listen to the song, you're mistaken, because that is the only thing that's important. That's the only thing that's going to make people want to buy it or listen to it more than once, or, that's what's important to them. They don't say, my God, I want to hear that snare drum again. You know,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not the
yeah,
way that
yeah.
works.
No, exactly. But that's also something like because I write a lot of my own music, and that's something I try to like do for myself, and that's not trying to be like everyone else these days. And I know it sounds like I'm generalizing, but so much of what we hear, I feel like, is it's all the same. Take the top 10 hits. It's all the same. Like what I miss is character, and I know we spoke about this the last time you mentioned it now too. But having the guts of being a producer or engineer, whatever, having the guts of recording something and not go in and change it to the grid. Like having the guts of being able to, oh, you did a sort of mistake there, blah 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 blah, and just having the guts of leaving those stuff in, because that's in the end what makes music to some degree. So I think that goes along with what you're saying, like trying to just make stuff feel nice, and I feel like we're missing more and more of that in today's climate. I don't know. We
Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, but it's also it's like in the same way that's like all the people like, oh God, I miss the analog days, or oh God, I miss working on tape, or like a lot of the music isn't played by people in a room. So what mistakes would you leave? Like there's nothing to leave. And I think some of this stuff is still really compelling to listen to. Like when Skrillex first came out, like those fucking
yeah.
bass drops were I wanted to listen to him over and over and over. Like, how can you possibly make me feel that way with a square wave with some low end in it? Like, it was insane. And something that's gigantic, like Despacito was several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen to that, everyone did copycats of it and they're trying to do it. But there's that groove, even though I'm sure it's all on the grid and there might be a loop and maybe there's some live percussion, maybe there isn't. I have absolutely no idea. I don't know anything about the production of that song. But the Billie Eilish stuff, all that
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
there are no mistakes on the Billie Eilish record. Not at
Mm-hmm.
all. That thing is produced, but
Mm-hmm.
it feels amazing and you want to listen to it. So you can do it in any way possible. But yes, I do think there's also something exciting about a false start on a song or someone laughing or something that's slightly out of time and wonky. Yeah, I love that stuff. And it's what gives it details where you might want to go back and listen to it. But I think you can do it without that as well and be really compelling. That isn't what makes it compelling. It just that could be compelling.
Right. Good point. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, I think when like talking about Billie Eilish in that case, like I guess the only on yeah, I don't know if they're playing some bass on the record or not, but like with the voice, then that becomes what is the natural
Yeah.
part, and she has a really good voice, obviously. So I guess that was what draws you in.
Yeah, absolutely. But the tracks could easily have not been done in a way that was sympathetic to the way she was singing. And like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all so well done, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, there's no either or answer in this discussion. Like anything could be. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the
I
stuff
mean, look,
today are good.
it's a much easier thing to think about if you just think about visual art instead. Think about paintings and the
Mm,
range of paintings there have been and
mm.
still are. And some of them you like and some of them you don't. And
Yeah, yeah.
some people are regarded by pretty much everybody as really good painters and some people are not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exactly the same thing. And just because something is popular doesn't mean it's good or whatever, what blah blah blah. But it's easier to kind of see the difference because visual, like we were talking about before, sound is really difficult. Visual is easy.
Mm.
So you might like realism, period. You might like something in a painting to look like the thing. But that means you might also really like Dolly because everything is actually distorted and weird, but very realistic. Like the watch that's melting over the tree branch looks exactly like a watch or like a clock. It's just doing something that's kind of fucked up. Or you might like the surrealism and you like Cy Twombly where nothing looks like anything. And
Mm-hmm.
like whatever, that might speak to you more. But it's the same type of arguments.
Yeah, yeah. No, exactly,
And I just
exactly.
made that up, so that might be total shit. But I think it's, I think it's relevant.
It is, and yeah, I know I said it a lot, and you might end up sounding ignorant, but you're correct. There's no either or in this discussion. But as a weird segue because I'd love to ask you about, because I know you worked with Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's my favorite bands of all time, and you worked with John and then Josh, and now obviously John is back, and that was announced maybe I don't know 2 years ago now. But how excited are you about that? Because I'm super excited.
Yeah, I mean, I love Josh. I've
Yeah,
mixed
yeah, yeah.
solo
Of
stuff
course.
for him, and we're really good
Mm.
friends. But I love John as well, and I think that for me, it's not even like the band had a huge transition from one to the other, because Josh had played on a bunch of John's solo records. Like, they were musicians together for a long time before Josh ever did anything with the Chili Peppers. And then Josh toured with them as a fifth musician on stage at the end of the Stadium Arcadium tour. So I mean, that's just those records that they made with Josh. But the thing about John is that he was out of the band for 10 years, but I'm sure that on again and off again, he was thinking about what he might do with a rock band. Because, like, he was just done being in a rock band. He didn't want to be in a band anymore when he left. Like, okay, fine. As far as I know, I mean, he didn't tell me that. That's what I read or something like that. Like, he just didn't want to be in the
Yeah.
band anymore. Like, it was just, he wanted to do some other stuff. But I'll bet he's got 10 years of ideas that have been percolating. And so I'm super excited to hear whatever it is that they do. Yeah. But I'm super excited to hear basically even One Hot Minute. Like, it's not my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah.
Chili Peppers record, but it's still a Chili Peppers record.
Hmm.
So yeah.
No, I love that one too. But so have you been involved in working with the new album at all,
No,
or
no,
no?
not at all. Not at all.
Do you know who's involved?
No, don't know a thing.
Right.
But I'm
You're just a
very
fan,
excited
huh,
to
as
hear
me.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool, man. And actually, before our interview, I saw that Rick Rubin was on Mark Maron's podcast, and I don't know if you're familiar with his podcast, but he was talking about just like Rick Rubin was saying how he's the least technical person in the room. Essentially, he just said, "I just sit in the back." I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "I'm sitting in the back and I just say, oh, make it sound different," or something like that." And obviously, you work with him, so I'm just curious to hear, like, how is it being in the, or maybe not how it is being with him in the room, but how is it working with him, like taking directions? Is he a person who says, "Oh, Andrew, make it sound better"? Like, is it sort of that directions, or is
Well,
it more
what
casual?
the point is that he is the epitome of somebody who only cares about what he's hearing coming out of the speakers.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter if you're using a Neve and a Fairchild. If it's not
Yeah.
happening, it's not happening. Period. And that's
Mm-hmm.
it. And that's basically what he was saying, is that if he's in the back of the room and he's not enjoying it, you got to enjoy it. And whether that's something to do with the arrangement or something to do with the way people are playing their instruments or something to do with the way you're recording it, whatever it is, that's got to get sorted out, because that's
Mm.
the gig. And if essentially that's the job of any producer, is to get rid of all the stuff they don't like, because their job is to have an opinion. There are lots of other jobs producers do, but basically have an opinion and finish a record. That's what they're there to do. And so
Mm.
what Rick's describing is, like, that's the core idea of doing it, is being in the back of the room, always being objective, always listening, and trying to direct the people to make it be what they think it's supposed to be.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and obviously he's done that very well.
Yeah.
But he's also hiring people like you who, knows. I mean, you know your way around the studio definitely, and how to make stuff sound killer. Uh, but how did you guys click? I mean, if there is such a thing to click
Well, I
between.
think, the thing with, if you talk to anybody about what's like the most important thing, obviously you have to be competent, but the most important thing is that you're somebody people want to be in the room with,
Mm.
because it's a really intense, collaborative, exposing, lengthy process, and everybody's got to be in the room. And if you're an asshole, why would they want you in the room? There's got to be somebody else who can do what you do, who's less of an asshole. So I think, that a part of why I worked with Rick for so long was just, we got along, and I made stuff happen. Like, that's all. It's
Mm.
just, and I think with the artists as well, it wasn't just Rick, it's like, if Rick liked me, but the artist didn't, like, there'd be a lot of times where I'd be doing overdubs, like with John on By the Way. It was just me and John. So obviously at that point, the only thing that would matter to Rick is the final thing that I have recorded. Well, with John, that's going to be more about what John wants to have happen than what I want to have happen anyway. But I'm there because I can be in the room with John, figure out what he wants to do. How are we going to make that happen and make it happen in a way that keeps John happy and creative and everything moving forward? And then when Rick hears the stuff, it isn't like, oh, well, okay, I kind of see what you were going for, but why the hell is it like that? Like, it's like, great. And they move on and just do what they do.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm gonna be a bit of a fanboy for a second, if that's okay. uh, because I know obviously you worked on Stereo Mercadium, and I remember when I started out, that was the record that I was really listening to a lot, and obviously you guys did a terrific work on that record. But as a broad question, what was the experience working on that record? Because you recorded and mixed it, right? So you
No,
were part of the whole.
I didn't do the basic tracking. So Mark
Right.
Lynette and Ryan Hewitt did most of the basic tracking. And then Ryan and I did a lot of the overdubs, but mostly I recorded Anthony's vocals. Like that's,
Right.
and for a long time, because we had 50 songs for that record, and he recorded lead vocals on all of them. Or 50, 38, I don't remember. It was a lot of songs. And so for a really long time, I was just doing vocals with Anthony. And then mixing, Ryan Hewitt and I both mixed. So we mixed about half each of the record.
Yeah. But was there ever like, did the band come in and listen and Rick, or was it sending? Because you did an analog, obviously, so I
Yeah,
assume they would have
that
to
record
come
was
in.
all analog, but we would make, at that point, we couldn't send stuff over the internet, so we would make CDs, and they were being driven over. John would usually come because he usually had enough things that he wanted to get his hands on and change during the mixes. So he'd usually come in for like a day on each mix just to tweak stuff that would be too difficult to give me notes on, and he'd want to experiment a little bit more. But the rest of the guys, would just be comments,
Right.
emails or phone calls or whatever.
Right. But are you the one who got them into like modular synths? Because I know you're really into modular synths, and I've
Oh,
seen
I
them.
didn't get them into it. No, John got me back into it. I mean, I
Oh yeah.
used them in college and loved them, but I never had bought one because it's such a rabbit hole. I knew there's no way to get in cheap. It's impossible. Like you need to spend thousands of dollars. But on By the Way, we used John's modular to process tons of stuff. And it was just me and him in a hotel room processing stuff like for days on end. And it was so much fun and so great that's when I decided, like, no, I actually need to buy a system, and got back into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a fan of modular synths, and like you just said, like, you can't get in cheap. So I actually managed to get like a Korg MS-20, like not the old one, but the reissue, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And just experimenting with like the softer version. I forgot what it's called, VC Rack or something. But it's like you said, like John, and I think he did that on Stereo Mercadium too. There's a lot of guitars going through the modular synth, which is it's just so awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And vocal treatments as well. Yeah. And on By the Way, Josh and I did tons of vocal treatments, especially on the I'm Beside You collection, the ones that came out afterwards. We did tons of stuff, and guitar pedals, and like whatever. We put the whole mix through guitar pedals in a couple of spots, like. And that's what's great about both of those guys. I mean, obviously, everyone in that band is ridiculously creative, but in particular, John and Josh were really into this, like, I want to make a moment out of that syllable. Like, okay, what are we going to do? And there'd be an idea, and you'd just chase it and do it. So, yeah, super, super creative.
Yeah. And like modular synths, it also feels like an instrument that is perfect for a sound engineer, because you have to think about what you're doing, not just let's just drum. But we have to think like.
No, you got to know everything, and more than half the time, I'm not even using the oscillators. I'm processing other stuff. So it's just it's great. I love it. I mean, you can see behind me. It's the only piece of custom studio furniture I've ever bought was that case for the modular.
Right.
So I was so sick of just having it in a rack, and it was hard to use, and I wasn't using it. And I just was going to do another low roar record, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. And I knew I wanted to use the modular a lot. And I'm like, okay, I've got to get a case made. And I did. And it's the best thing I've ever done because it's
Yeah,
awesome.
it looks sick. It looks really nice. But talking about lore war, because I played a game, Death Stranding, and
Yes.
obviously you guys got them on there.
Yeah, there are
Uh,
21 songs in that game or something like that.
yeah,
It's insane.
how did that come about? Did you
Well,
pitch
I mean,
music or?
the actual thing came about because Ryan was living in Iceland when he made the first two records. And he made friends with a record store there that's also a record label. And they put out the first two no, they put out the first one, maybe just the second one on their little label as well, called 12 Tonar. And they're still there in Reykjavik. I believe they're still there. I know they're financially, it's difficult. But I think they're there. So, and they would play the second low roar record all the time because they just loved it. All the people working there loved it. And Hideo Kojima was in Iceland and went into the record shop and heard it
Wow.
and like, what the fuck is this? I don't know that he said that. Maybe he doesn't swear. I don't know.
He probably did,
But
you know.
but he absolutely loved the music and found out what it was. And he was listening to the music the whole time he was writing the game. And it was playing, and all of the developers were listening to it. And so then when he did the first trailer at E3 for the game, he wanted to use I'll Keep Coming. And then he wanted to use all those songs in the game because he just had been conceptualizing the game with that music in mind the whole time. So we gave
Wow.
them stems, and the songs basically play, but they kind of, like, if you stay in the area longer, they will lengthen themselves. And it's really cool the way they've done it. I mean, I'm terrible at video games, and I played the game just long enough to hear, I think, like three songs or something like
Yeah.
that. But it's amazing to be in the middle of a game and then that, low roar song starts up. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, first of all, it fits the game perfectly. And yeah, like for you guys, it must be pretty cool, be like, oh, awesome,
Oh
we
yeah,
have,
it's great. I mean,
yeah,
it basically doubled our audience. There's no,
yeah, yeah.
which is huge for an indie act. I mean, just to be an indie act, and we're about to put out the fifth full length record in 10 years. It was the July 4th of this year was the 10-year anniversary of releasing the first record. And it's extraordinary that Ryan, the main artist, can have a career. Like, he doesn't have to have a job. Like, when we did the first record, he was driving a forklift in a recycling plant. Like, it was fucking horrible. He's like, and now he actually can survive off of his music. And some of that is down to Death Stranding, absolutely. And then it's just, 10 years of working really, really hard. And he's done tours and, yeah, it's pretty incredible. So, and the new record is fucking awesome. We're really, really excited about it. Like, we think it's by far the best record. And, you better think that. Otherwise, why would you put it out?
Yeah.
But like, we're really, really excited 10 years in to put out the next record. So yeah, a week from
Nice.
Friday it comes out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna look out for that. Definitely. But so, what was I gonna ask? It just slipped my mind. But so, yeah, so Tone Quake Records. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that's still something you're actively running and all
Yeah, I
that.
mean,
Then.
basically the label started to put out that Low Roar record. I'd already been thinking about starting a label forever and whatever, but I started it to put out the first record. And then for a little while, I was trying to expand the roster and signed this amazing band, Act Rights, from Austin. And we put out a record and an EP, but nobody ever heard them. And I'm just not good at the promotion side of it. And I never really found people who were great at it to help me with all this stuff. So we've got a good team in place for Low Roar, but that's a really specific kind of music. Like, they're not going to also be the right people to work on a garage band from Austin. So basically, other than this other new artist that I just put a single out with, her name is Sun. She's a French artist who's just super fucking talented. Like, heavy riff guitar player and this amazing voice. And so we put
Cool.
out a song, and then the plan is that we're going to do an EP that I'll put out. But the idea is hopefully that she'll get signed to something bigger, because I think she's much more of a mainstream act potentially. So
What was her name? You said
Sun.
Sun. Right.
Yeah.
And that's out already.
Yeah. The first song
Oh,
is,
okay, cool.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Golden is the first single. And so, yeah, the label exists, and there've been a couple of times when I've offered to independent artists that I'm working with, like, hey, look, if you don't find a better way to put it out, you're not going to get much out of me, but here's my distribution deal and blah, blah, blah. And if you want to do it. So, and we've gotten close on a couple of records, and then they found other places to do it, which were better fits. But yeah, so the label exists, but it's really the only artist I'm an active label for with records out is Low Roar.
Right. Makes sense then. But so, why? I mean, in these days, I mean, I know you're an independent label, and I guess you can do more tailored stuff, really. But do you see artists like signing more to indie labels like yourself rather than the big ones?
It just depends what kind of artist you are. Like, I think
Mm.
Sun, she could be gigantic. Like, she could be doing arenas and stadiums and stuff like that because of the genre of music she's in. And like, they're just, I think that she might be a good fit for a more traditional label because
Mm.
she would need more of a machine behind her and, stuff like
Right.
that. But Low Roar, like we had the third record was actually out on a different indie label that was more established and had a bigger roster. And we just decided for the fourth record that we were just going to put it out ourselves. Like it just depends. Every artist is going to get something different out of every situation. I think a lot of artists can be very successful at self-releasing if they're really good at social media, like Sun. Um, Caroline, she's incredibly good at social media, like insanely good at it. So she could actually kind of release it herself, but she decided that we would put it out on the label because I've got more access to some of the like new release playlists and things like that because of my distributor. So whatever. So
Right.
I think you've got to be really, really specific about what you think you're going to get out of it. I think this sort of dream idea about getting signed and that's going to mean anything is just that. It's a dream. Like, it means exactly what you think it means, and that's it. And
Right.
it's still, a lot of it is going to be down to you to do as the artist. The label isn't going to wave a magic wand and now you're a star.
No. Yeah, I mean that's also why I thought it was these days. Like you said, if you are good at promotion or whatever, like social media, like you said for Sun, yeah, then there's no real need to go to label, unless in this
Yeah.
particular case
I'm just going
for
to let
you.
my cat in. Sorry, my cat is meowing at the window.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to let
yeah. No problem.
Come on, Squid. Otherwise, he'd just meow the whole time.
But yeah, no problem at
And
all.
he's probably going to go right back out. But yeah. All right, see you, Squid. There you go.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, what does it say? Like, yeah, you might not need a label these days, in the end, but
Yeah, look, the tools to release a digital recording of music and have it available all over the world are available to everybody. The
hmm,
trick is to get people to know it exists. And the answer to that trick, there are a million different ways to do it. So, yeah.
but how do you think that works for like mixing engineers like yourself? Because obviously you came up during traditional labels like selling CDs. Uh, how do you think you would have navigated a career if like because I my perception is that engineers face the same problem, so to speak. Like, how do you get their name out there unless you're really good at social media too? Maybe you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, it's your work and it's who you know. And I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
mean who you know like nepotism, who you know. I mean, it's like you need to go meet musicians who need stuff mixed and do it for them. And like that's it because like with Rick, the way Rick finds people is he hears a record and he's like,
Hmm.
"Holy shit, who did that?" Like the Fiona Apple record, he heard that and said, "Who's this Rich Costi guy?" And then Rich has been mixing stuff for him for years and years and years. And Rich is amazing. And it's not like he wasn't doing amazing stuff before that record, but that caught somebody's ear.
Hmm.
And like Rob Kinelsky had a really good career for years. But the Billie Eilish thing, I'm sure he's charging way more money than he was before that record, and
Mm-hmm.
as well he should be. So there's always going to be luck involved, but you make your own luck by doing good work, working as much as you possibly can, and you've got a network in some way. And if you do that online as opposed to in person, that's fine. Yeah, in which case it's social media and all the usual stuff.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, good point. Good point. I'd love to ask you, because I know we're running out of time soon, but because obviously you moved to Wales and you're
No,
still
no,
in
I'm in
Wales.
England. I'm in England.
Oh,
Not
really?
Wales.
I thought it was
No,
Wales.
no, no. There's a lot of confusion. Everybody thinks I lived in Wales. All
Okay.
my analog gear used to be at a studio in Wales, which is
Right,
about an
right.
hour's drive from where I live. But I live in England in Worcestershire. But that's also that studio has closed, and I've sold all that gear, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
all long gone,
Yeah, because that's
unfortunately.
what I wanted to ask you about. Like, because, yeah, I heard it closed down and all that sort of stuff. Uh, yes, I mean, how's that whole experience been? Like, you move country. That's not a small thing. That takes adjusting to, I guess. And obviously with the studio and the studio business being what it is these days, how have you navigated all that ups and downs? I guess it's been.
Well, I mean, the move to England was actually not difficult because I um, I'm married to an English woman and we live 5 minutes from where she grew up. So I'd spent lots of time in this area and we actually knew a lot of people in this area. So, and once I started doing Mix with the Masters, we were over here every year and we would just
Mm,
come to England after the seminars and stay longer and longer. The last couple of years before we moved, we were here for 6 weeks after the seminars. So I was spending lots of time here to the point where I wanted to be here more anyway. So that move was actually pretty painless as far as an international move could be. And the
right.
studio thing, it was just a great relationship. I mean, I had worked at the studio for a few times, made a few records there, and they had a console that needed to go, basically, and I had a console that needed to go somewhere. It was just like the perfect situation. But I was not involved in the day-to-day running of the studio. Mono Valley still just operated as a normal studio, and if I wanted to use it, I booked it. I
Mm,
booked the room just like anybody else would and paid full fee. And because I was getting basically a rental for the gear. So it
right.
was a very, they were running the studio. I don't want to pretend like it was my studio. It was a partner because of, the equity of all the gear, but I was not running the studio. So when it had to shut down, then it was just a matter of like, well, what the hell am I going to do with the gear? And
Mm,
there wasn't going to be another studio that was going to be as good a fit as that. And I thought about putting it in storage, especially in the middle of a pandemic. And like that console is not going to survive in storage. It needs to be set up, powered up, being used, being maintained. Like it's super low maintenance when you're using it. But you put it in storage for 2 years and get it out, it'll take you 4 months to get everything working again.
wow.
And I didn't want to go through it. So yeah.
Mm. So where is it now then? The console you sold that? You
Yeah,
sold that
somebody
then, I guess.
bought
Yeah.
all the gear. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
That's a sweet deal.
Yeah. It was crazy. And it
That
made
was
me
been.
sad,
Mm,
but it was definitely the right thing to do. It really was because I would never mix on analog gear again, and I
mm, mm.
don't produce enough that I need to have my own studio for recording, and I don't want to open a commercial studio myself.
Yeah, yeah.
There was no other solution really.
No, makes perfect sense, man. I mean, yeah, opening a studio, that seems like the least best thing to do for people.
I mean, obviously, there's still a market for it. And if you can do it cost effectively, then I think that it could be, if you're the right person to do it, it could be a great thing to do because there are lots and lots of bands that, let's say, for instance, don't have a good place to record drums.
Mm, mm.
So there is still a market for it, but it's very different from what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But Andrew, it's been a real pleasure. Maybe before we wrap up, because I know I think people know this already, but obviously you have a podcast on Pure Mix
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. But where else can people find you and hire you and listen to your stuff?
Well, I mean, the main thing for finding me, like that podcast, I'm taking the summer off, but we'll be starting up
Hmm.
again in September. So that's every Monday. But they're also coming out as audio podcasts. So they're on Spotify and Apple, like it's everywhere. Andrew talks to awesome people, and it's been great. I've just been interviewing people for like 5 hours.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of nuts. So anyway, so there's that. I've got videos there. I've got videos at Mix with the Masters. So for that kind of thing, if you want me talking about mixes I've done or whatever, it's there. If you want to hear stuff I've done, I mean, I don't know, just go to All Music, which is very incomplete and inaccurate, but that'll give you a list of stuff and you can just listen.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't really, I mean, yeah, I have an Instagram account and I post like once a month. And I took myself off Facebook because I just wanted to take myself off. Like, I don't really, I'm not very good at that. And
Right.
if you wanted to get in touch with me about actual work, then I've got managers. So if you just search for my name and management, that's easy. You know, you'll find
Perfect.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm around. You know, I don't really leave the
Awesome.
house much, but I'm around.
By the way, are you still? I mean, not now, obviously, but I know you and Chad Blake had that. What was it?
Yeah, we
The
called them We're Thirsty, where we would just go to a pub and people would show up.
yeah.
Yeah, we've done 5 or 6 of them, and as soon as the pandemic is over enough to do it again, which my feeling is probably going to be another year, then we'll do
Probably.
another
Yeah.
one. We just pick
Mm.
a pub and we let people know, and it's great because 30 or 40 people show up at rural
Awesome.
pubs in different places, and we've done one in New York, and so yeah,
Nice, 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 nice. But so, because I used to live in London, now I live in Leeds. Because it was quite far sometimes to go to those pubs. But hopefully
yeah.
I'm closer now.
Yeah, well, you know, we want to do them in different places around the country, but we're both
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Like he's actually out in Wales, like
Right, right, right,
very
right.
far out in Wales, and I'm here, so it just makes sense. But I mean, we had people fly in from Germany to come to one of
Wow.
these.
Damn.
So yeah,
Not
crazy.
bad. Well, awesome, Andrew. But yeah, again, thank you very much, and thank you for taking time.
Thanks for having me.
Real pleasure, man. Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure talking to you again, and I hope you, the listener or watcher, enjoyed it as well. Please let me know in the comments what you think about this conversation. If you have any questions or just general comments, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And also, while you're at it, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just hit the mic. But yeah, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and all that. Your support really matters and really helps. And we're growing slowly but steadily. And that's all thanks to you. And if you want to get exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just enter your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. And it's completely free, of course. But that's it for this week. Real pleasure having you here. And thank you for watching or listening. And I will see you next week again. So take care and see you soon.